Peter surprised me by suggesting a divorce when I returned home. Up until that moment, I had supported him wholeheartedly, and I cannot forgive him. Despite concealing my true feelings, I responded calmly, stating that being with him was suffocating, and we were heading for a divorce. I jokingly mentioned giving him custody of our child for $950,000. Peter, perhaps taken aback by my nonchalant response, must now face the consequences. It's too late for him. He is about to experience a living hell. My name is Jessica, a 27-year-old receptionist at a certain hotel. I married Peter, my boss, last year. I discovered I was pregnant at the beginning of this year and resigned from my job. Since then, I've been a dedicated full-time housewife, managing housework and childcare for our newborn son, who struggles with nightly cries and difficulty drinking milk. Despite Peter's initial support during our chaotic introduction to parenthood, he abruptly changed. Once proactive in housework and childcare, he started exhibiting odd behavior. Today, I have a company social event, and he dismisses the need for dinner, citing frequent social obligations. While I understand the importance of networking, it seems excessive for someone in his position. His recent lifestyle changes have become the norm, and I've started noticing distressing actions. Upon returning from a drinking party, Peter, unusually in good spirits and seemingly sober, welcomed me home. His confident response to my casual remark about his drinking habits raised my suspicions. Instead of the usual scent of alcohol, I caught a whiff of women's perfume. Peter dismissed my concerns, attributing his good mood to a change in seating arrangements at the party. My intuition told me otherwise, especially when Peter, coming home early in the morning, went to work without sleep. Discovering his phone left behind, I debated returning it. When he retrieved it, his defensive reaction confirmed my suspicions he was hiding something. I resisted the urge to confront him immediately, as risking the deletion of evidence would be unwise. Despite Peter's verbal abuse and attempts to assert dominance, I endured, keeping my suspicions to myself. Clenching my fists, I resolved to expose Peter's wrongdoing while biding my time. I struggled to contain my anger, and it seemed our son, who had been peacefully sleeping in the adjacent room, sensed my distress and woke up. His desperate cries for me echoed through the house, interrupting the tense atmosphere. Startled by Peter's furious yelling, my body involuntarily jolted as I recoiled from his almost raised fist and aggressive demeanor. I couldn't help but wonder how our relationship had deteriorated to this point. There was none of this hostility when we first got married, but upon deeper reflection, I realized I might have been oblivious to certain warning signs. His actions, such as expecting me to clean meticulously after using the toilet, ensuring no dishes piled up and handling all the laundry and dirty shoes, seemed to have always hinted at this side of him. The increased housework and childcare responsibilities, more than what I experienced at my parents' house, became overwhelming. Initially, Peter was supportive, but now everything had changed. As the burden of housework and childcare surpassed what felt reasonable, I contemplated divorcing him and escaping this oppressive environment with our son. Just as these thoughts consumed me, a turning point occurred. About a month into investigating Peter's personal matters, he showed me a picture during a rare moment of relaxation. It captured a cheerful time with former colleagues from my previous job who had been friendly to me. Peter accused me of leisurely spending outside while he worked and questioned the source of the money, accusing me of misusing our living expenses. In that moment, our son, supposed to be sleeping, woke up crying loudly, intensifying the atmosphere. Despite Peter attempting to go to him and yell, I stood in front of the door with determination, refusing to let him through. I confronted him, asserting that he couldn't yell at a newborn baby. It was then that my eyes, once blind to the situation, opened to the realization that a happy future was unlikely for my son and me if I stayed with this man. Determined to leave, I acknowledged that I had enough reasons and material to do so. Now, I needed to make enough money independently and find a job discreetly, separate from my previous employment, so that Peter wouldn't find out. However, as I contemplated my future, Peter forcefully pushed me aside, opened the door, and coldly commanded me to leave immediately, stating that a wife who couldn't respect her husband was not needed. At your convenience, My funds? What's with the arrogant manner of speech? Who do you think you are? If you can respond in such a manner, you're of no use to me anymore. Take the child and disappear quickly. Peter, who flung harsh words at me, roughly pushed our crying son and my belongings towards me, casting me out of the entrance. The door was locked and chained, rendering it impossible to return home. Stranded on the streets in a silent back alley late at night, with only the echoes of my son's cries, I found myself apologizing for my perceived failure as a parent. Fearful of being reported by local residents, I hastily entered a park, tightly clutching my son, whose tiny body desperately sought love. Ensuring he didn't get cold, I stayed close, signaling my presence and apologizing repeatedly. I vowed to protect this child at all costs. As dawn approached, my plan was to seek help at the city hall or elsewhere. Just as I thought of that, rain began to fall, and without an umbrella or anything else, I held my son tightly, shedding tears as freely as the raindrops. If only I had severed ties with Peter earlier, if I had divorced him before our child was born, if I had been a stronger woman, none of this would have happened. Amidst this remorseful situation, with no escape in sight, I despaired. Suddenly, an elegant elderly man appeared, offering his umbrella despite the late hour. He lived in the luxurious house in front of the park and came to check on us due to the persistent crying. There was a nostalgic feeling about him. Sharing my experiences, he placed his towel over my head, inviting us to his home. Inside, a shocking truth unfolded. Grateful for the kindness of the female servants who took care of my son, I slept soundly for the first time in a while. Waking up past midnight, a servant informed me of incessant phone calls. Peter's messages were predictable, incapable of managing without me, and demanding my immediate return. His actions epitomized a useless husband, leaving me regretting what I ever saw in him. Though reluctant to return, ignoring him would invite more trouble. Thus, I decided to talk to Peter, commencing a fierce battle between us. "Where have you been until now?" "No breakfast prepared. The house is a mess." After a trivial argument last night, he stubbornly stayed out until morning. "Where the hell have you been, you idiot?" Despite my desire to retort, the battle between Peter and me began anew. "Here I am, right?" I refrained from uttering the sharp words. "It's impossible for me to enter when you've locked it, and I had no way of knowing there was no breakfast. If you regret not preparing breakfast for yourself, you shouldn't have driven me out. Unlike me, you're smart, right?" He consistently belittled me. If he were as smart as he claimed, he would have avoided a situation like this. Ultimately, he was the one who suffered, and he should realize it's his own fault. As I responded with words intended to provoke his emotions, Peter's temples twitched. "I can't take it anymore. I can't go on with you." Perhaps his anger had reached its peak. I don't know when he prepared it, but Peter pulled a piece of paper from his room and slammed it on the living room table. "Divorce. I never want to see your face again." There was a divorce notice stamped with Peter's name and seal. He probably thought I would panic upon seeing it, expecting me to apologize. The thoughts in my heart leaked into my expressions, but I wouldn't play into his hands. I took a ballpoint pen and my seal from a nearby shelf and signed without hesitation. "Are you unusually obedient, even though you're unemployed and without parents with nowhere to go? LOL. What are you going to do? LOL. Despite his bluster, cold sweat faintly appeared on his forehead, and the corner of his mouth twitched. His expression spoke volumes. Internally despising him, I quickly gathered the rest of my belongings, giving him the silent treatment. "Well, whatever. This feels refreshing. LOL. While I packed, ignoring his words, Peter, who seemed nonchalant, delivered the final blow. "Being with you makes me poor. Let's divorce. LOL. I'll give you the kid. Pay me $950,000. LOL. Whether it was because I showed no sign of agitation, Peter demanded an absurd amount of money. I was utterly appalled internally. Peter tried to shake me with money, attempting to manipulate my emotions. If it turned into a verbal fight, he could dominate and force me into submission, causing me distress while he enjoyed his carefree leisure. Reading Peter's transparent thoughts, I turned back with a full-faced smile and responded affirmatively without hesitation. "You okay?" Hearing that, Peter visibly shook, becoming flustered and bewildered. "Do you understand? It's $9 million. There's no way you can prepare such a huge amount. Is that all you wanted to say? I'll transfer it at the end of this month. Please handle the procedures afterward. Goodbye." Thus, Peter and my divorce were settled. I transferred a substantial sum of $9 million to his account, as he requested. I had noticed his affair and gathered evidence, but hadn't thought about demanding compensation from him. That's because I intended to show him a hell beyond retrieving money. 2 weeks later, I woke up in the morning to find numerous frantic calls from Peter on my phone. The time had finally come. Peter would surely call again. Sure enough, I received an incoming call from him. I didn't answer the first time, and even when I did on the second time, I immediately hung up. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Are you messing with me?" If I had answered on the first ring, he would have maintained his composure, and the conversation would have progressed smoothly. My second action was intended to irk him. If he remained somewhat rational, my plan would be ruined. It was crucial to intentionally annoy the short-tempered Peter and make him lose his cool. So, the third time was the charm. I deliberately didn't initiate the conversation. I needed to speak while keeping him irritated to maintain my dominant position. This situation, where all the machinations were proceeding according to my plan, felt incredibly satisfying. I even sensed a hint of superiority as you maintained your usual noisiness. You're aware that I can adjust my phone's volume, rendering your shouts unnecessary. In truth, I am exceptionally occupied, contrary to my claim of elegantly sipping a drink and flipping through a magazine. Currently, I am relishing a carefree holiday while raising my son. My eloquent speech merely serves to disguise my genuine satisfaction, making it seem as if engaging with you is a waste of my time. You claim innocence, but in reality, I orchestrated the dismantling of everything in Peter's life: his wife, job, money, and family. Amidst Peter's desperate pleas over the phone, I find profound pleasure, inwardly doubled over in laughter. Despite my apparent forgetfulness, I remain engrossed in my enjoyable moments with magazines, speaking in a barely audible voice. Peter's life unraveled after our divorce. He hastily remarried, only to face further calamity when his new wife discovered his previous marriage and child. In a cascade of events, he lost both his wife and job. His attempt to salvage his reputation led to financial ruin, exhausting the $9 million he received from me in compensation and damages. Even the losses incurred by his former employer were not covered by this amount, forcing him to deplete all his savings. Peter, in his desperation, accused me of revealing his previous marriage, blaming me for robbing him of happiness. Closing the magazine, I decided to confront him. Despite my intentions to simply listen and sever ties, his unrepentant attitude compelled me to address his misdeeds. He failed to recognize the consequences of his actions, cheating and mistreating his wife, resulting in divorce and job loss. In my lower status, he accused me of preaching to him, insinuating that his challenging life was a punishment for leaving me. Misinterpreting my situation, he assumed I worked from dawn to dusk. Lifting the magazine before me, I couldn't help but internally mock his understanding of busyness. Sarcastically, yet with refined words, I informed him of my recent engagement reading a beauty magazine. With that leisure concluded, I intended to savor my second cup of tea and perhaps engage in some knitting. I questioned the legitimacy of his mockery, even over the phone, envisioning his face turning as red as a boiled octopus, an image that filled me with amusement. His non-stop screams, meant to provoke, only added to my amusement. Having been unable to assert myself before, I found pleasure in having him figuratively spinning in the palm of my hand. Rejecting the idea of resolving matters over a phone call, he threatened to come to my house immediately. Casually, I welcomed him but assured him of being turned away by the servants. I disclosed my current residence in a mansion, living with my father, and switched to a video call, presenting him with an unexpected view: the chairman from his workplace who had assisted me. Greeting him as my father, I left Peter visibly shaken. Peter, who was previously told I had no father, struggled to comprehend the revelation. He discovered that my parents had a forbidden romance, leading to my birth in a household where societal boundaries clashed. My father, heir to a financial conglomerate, was disowned due to Grandma's disapproval of his marriage to my mother. Despite their separation, my mother insisted on legal recognition for me. While the marriage was never allowed, monthly child support was provided. Last year, my mother passed away, leaving my father to watch over me from the shadows. Peter expressed genuine shock upon seeing me standing outside the house, drenched, on a day when the chairman took care of us. Confirming my father's involvement, I glared at Peter with intensity. My father gently placed his hand on my back, offering support. Peter, who claimed I had no financial power, learned of my father's takeover of the company, boasting a total asset value of $12 billion. Unconcerned about the $9 million, my father assured me that he had proposed the arrangement after assisting us. Addressing the woman in the photo, my father explained her as the daughter of an acquaintance. He pledged to inform the other party and secure a swift divorce, emphasizing that they must be understanding people. My father encouraged me to prioritize myself and our child, assuring me that he would recover everything and prevent unhappiness. Accepting the divorce and effortlessly transferring the stipulated amount, I confronted Peter about his misguided assumptions. Despite his defeated demeanor, he remained silent, perhaps realizing that he had no choice but to back down from the situation. Peter ceased interfering in our lives, and several years later, my son entered elementary school, surrounded by the warmth of my father and a fulfilling family life. Both in work and private matters, I led a content life, finally achieving the sense of family warmth that had eluded me.